The idea is to have a conversation today in relation to minority rights and minority situation in prisons of Iran. So welcome everyone to our third episode of Tuesdays Against the Execution. It is my pleasure today to host Professor Fernand de Varennes, who is an expert and former UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues, and he has an extensive expertise also in different places of the world, as we already discussed before at the start of that conversation today. So the idea today is to concentrate, to focus on the situation of minorities in prisons of Iran. But before to give the floor to Professor de Varennes, I would love to open a little window and put the attention in particular on what happened in exile prison, and I apologize for my bad pronunciation, and send all our support today to Saeed Masouri. It is especially important in this 78th week of protest to underline that, because he is one of the principal founder of the movement. He is in prison now since this is 25 years of imprisonment, and the situation in the prison, it's among the worst, but most important, the local authority, the regime authority tried to arbitrarily move him from the prison to another one. And so it is important to underline that we are all with him today. That said, I'm happy to give the floor to Professor de Varennes, starting over the situation of minority in prison of Iran. But let me to premise that unfortunately the data we have in relation to the different ethnic minorities are not officials, and it is quite difficult to collect data about executions and arbitrary detention of minority groups in Iran. So, Professor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Professor Elia. Grazie mille. Muchas gracias. I think you mentioned actually Saeed Masouri, who has spent 25 years, as you said, as a prisoner, and who also was one of the founders of the campaign No to Executions on Tuesdays. One thing that perhaps is not fully appreciated is that he actually also comes from a region, an ethnic minority region. I think it is in the town he comes from, it's mainly Baloch minority, who have their own language as such. And that actually is important also to mention because it highlights one issue. His case and many hundreds of others who have been sentenced to death would occur without a fair trial or real judicial process. But it is, by and large, significantly and overwhelmingly even minorities who are actually receive a death warrant, who disproportionately, when we do have available data, and it's true that we don't have official statistics, a number of civil society organizations actually have tried to assess as much as they can, who are those who are being executed. And significantly and out of all proportion to their percentages, I just want to emphasize this point, minorities are much more likely to be executed. To give you a couple of examples, Kurds, once again, we don't have absolutely clear statistics. They may make up 9 to 10, around 9-10% of the population. I would even think perhaps a bit more, but they account for a staggering about 29% of executions in Iran last year. Baluchis were about, once again, 2, 4, maybe even more percent of the population. They account for 11, 13% of executions. And what we're seeing is that a vast majority of those executed for political affiliations or political prisoners who are executed, once again, out of all proportion, these have been minorities. Some statistics, once again, not 100% certain, but these are the best data that we have. Between 2010 and 2024, there have been at least 164 individuals who were executed for what is alleged political affiliations. And of these, 52% were Kurdish. 52% Kurdish, 29% Baloch, and 16% were Arab. Arabs are a minority also in Iran. And most of them also, by the way, tend to be Sunni Muslims, not all of them, but most of them. And therefore, what we have is that you have a huge, overwhelming proportion, in fact, of those who are, on the one hand, executed for political affiliation, or generally, those who are executed tend to be among minorities, individuals who belong to certain minorities. And if you add other smaller religious minorities, such as Baha'is, the Lourd, Azerbaijanis, you actually have very clearly a situation where executions just don't happen in a kind of equal way, to use a rather unfortunate expression. But these executions are overwhelmingly used by the regime and state authorities in Iran against certain minorities. There are reasons for that, and I'll stop in a moment to give perhaps so we can have more of a conversation. But I just want to point out the scale of what's happening. Iran, to my knowledge, has the second largest number of people executed every year. The first one would appear to be China. Once again, we don't have any official data, but clearly Iran comes in second place in this category. Last year, a record number of individuals were executed, around 1,000 or a bit last year in 2024. And in fact, this is also something I think we have to reflect upon, because it does signal something systematic that is happening. These are not coincidences. It's not accidental. Something is happening in Iran. In the last 5 years, or 5 years ago in 2022, about 5 years ago in 2022, there were only about 200 executions. And last year, we've reached 1,000, because there's new legislation, which we can talk about later, new legislation that has been proposed, which will make executions easier and be a recommended, in fact, sentence for more offenses. This was just proposed a few weeks ago. And most of these executions, for those who may not know this, occur in a secret. At the United Nations and many others, when I was Special Rapporteur, many of us have actually noticed how fair trials are not guaranteed. And in fact, it can be said not to be the case in most of these situations. Legal representation is often not provided for. And frequently, and this is well documented, frequently confessions are obtained under torture. So if I can summarize, then we can perhaps have an exchange. What you're seeing here is not accidental or just the result of the judicial system. What you have is the massive use of executions, clearly as a tool of suppression, of political repression, of the regime maintaining control by killing those portrayed or perceived as a threat to the current rulers of Iran. Let's be very blunt about what's happening here. And that explains why minorities are overwhelmingly those sentenced to death. The regime has a tendency to use violence, disproportionate violence, in regions where dissent is stronger. And this tends to involve minorities and the regions where they are concentrated. Remember the Women Life Freedom Movement after the 2022 death of Mahsa Amini? She was arrested by the religious morality police for not wearing properly the hijab. Her death, her mistreatment, by the way, was not only linked to her to the jihad. She is also a member of the Kurdish minority, and therefore her killing. After her killing, Kurdish and Baloch minority regions actually were the ones who mobilized with the most prolonged protests, and as a result, during the repression period, nearly half of all those killed in Iran, in the streets in Iran, came from these minority populations. So you really have here a situation where minorities are targeted in part or a lot to a degree because they're perceived as either a threat or not loyal or somehow not really part of the nation or as seen as disloyal in some way, or potential spies even. And these labels tends to mean, if they're considered separatist, disloyal, or spies, that they are at the receiving end of violence and, in fact, even execution for all of these factors. So I'll pause here. I think I kind of reacted very strongly to the open door that you gave me.
Thank you very much for this very detailed statement and open statement. So I have two questions. The first one, well, observation maybe. So it is interesting, and thank you to underline the fact that there is a sort of plan, well conceived, if I rightly understand you, well conceived plan from the regime to execute people, to use law as a tool of terror, like this in the same statement, prisoners. The movement from days against the execution fear, and the fact that also there is a sort of targeting minorities like an additional threat to the internal opposite. The other aspect, I think you to underline also that point, is the fact that you say that executions occur in silence, so not publicly normally. And in fact, in relation to the statistics, we have unofficial statistics. I recall here. For example, in relation to Kurdish minority in 2024, only 6 executions were announced over more than 80 targeted execution of people coming from Kurdish minority. So my question is, do you think that in this plan of reorganize the society, let me use the expression to limit any possible threat using arbitrary detention, totally absence of fair trial, and at the end executions, death penalty. There is a sort of dedicated search against the minority specifically. So, I mean, inside these atrocities, there is also a specific target over minority.
Yes. What I would suggest is that this is not part of a plan as such. but in a way is the result of the kind of religious nationalism that you have expressed through the regime. Quite clearly, in my opinion, and we have other reports on this, there is a somewhat a bias against, or a certain discrimination or predisposition of hostility, and seeing certain groups as threats that which result, when you don't have an independent judiciary, of the judiciary have a tendency to confirm results that are extremely aggressive and violent towards minorities that are seen as either separatists or disloyal or possible spies for America or or Israel, for example. So that, in a sense, I would not go so far to suggest that this is part of a systematic plan, but it is the result of not recognizing international human rights obligations, not recognizing and applying fundamental principles of justice in terms of a fair trial. And when you combine this with a certain insecurity of the regime and fear of others that could be political opponents, and also connected to discriminatory bias and antagonism towards Kurds, who are seen as a possible threat, to Baloch, who have a great deal of recommendations, or to Baha'is and others, or Baha'is in particular, who are seen as somehow alien from a religious point of view. All of that can result in situations of reaching decisions of executions much more likely for minorities such as the Kurds, Baloch, Baha'is, and others than would the normal or average majority Farsi population who are Sunni, who are Shia, sorry. So that's, I think, important. I would not go so far to say it is something that is a systematic plan, but is the result of inherent bias, insecurity, and also rejection of fundamental principles of humanity and justice that results in certain minorities being targeted overwhelmingly. I do want to emphasize this point. The numbers are staggering when you consider the percentage of those who are executed being mainly from just a handful of minority groups.
Yeah, this is interesting. The fact that you underline the fear of the regime, and the unique way is to misinterpret religion, if I can say, because the Quran is based on is based on the respect for humanity. So it is exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. They are putting in place in some way. Not from this religion, but it is well known that the word is a word of law, not a word of fear. So instrumentalization of religion and legalization of the manipulation of religious discourse to impose fear, terror, and death, it is exactly the opposite. So according to you, the situation is, of course, with the limited data we have in our hands, from where when you were active as a special representative till now, and especially after the pandemic, do you think that there is a sort of even worse level of closure of the regime?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to emphasize, because we do have some statistics, some data that clearly show that's from 2022. So after the pandemic, but with the Amini situation, the protest connected to the death of Amini, I think that startled the government, seeing massive demonstrations in the streets all over Iran, but particularly in minority regions, unsettled the government so much that they became much more repressive and violent, and using executions, in fact, judicial executions, if you will, through the criminal system, in a much more systematic way, targeted way. Once again, not accidental, but targeting particularly minorities who were seen as more of a threat. So just to recall, from 2022, the number of individuals executed went from about 200 to this year, or last year rather, about 1,000. That is a huge increase over a 5-year period. And I want to make this point again because I don't think there is enough reactions to this. Just a few weeks ago, there's a new legislation that's been proposed that's being fast-tracked, which would expand the kind of offenses where execution would be warranted as the punishment. So this includes espionage or cooperation with hostile governments. Now, very large once again, but also connecting it to the concept of corruption on earth, which is also another type of criminal offense under the Iranian legislation, which incurs the death penalty. So this was proposed or has gone through a process since on June 17, so just a few weeks ago. And this really opens the door to more kinds of offenses that could be considered to be to warrant an execution order, or also opens the door to more kinds of situations which could be considered to be situations where execution would be needed. And
it's more arbitrary than ever, practically.
Well, it is increasing the possibility of more executions, opening the door, in fact, telling the judiciary that they have to find conclusions of executions even more so. And that is going to lead to more individuals, political opponents, probably being identified wrongly as spying for Israel or the United States. Groups, certain minorities tend to be described as spies for Israel. Baha'is are often described as spies for Israel for different reasons. And therefore, we run the risk of actually having more and more executions, despite the record levels that we've been reaching in Iran. And I would predict that more and more of these will also be minorities, unless
Hello?
Yes, sorry.
Yes. Please.
Yes.
We lost the last part, I guess, for a microphone problem. Yeah.
Yes. So as I was saying, it's quite predictable that there will be a vast increase in the number of individuals who will be actually may be executed, may receive judgments of execution, and it is predictable that this increase will include minorities, and once again, vastly disproportionately.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. I know that it can be considered as a apocalyptic view, but is unfortunately the reality. And it is quite possible that the rise of execution is still going up. In fact, you mentioned the sort of I don't want to say competition among states who is the worst with the higher level of execution, but because of the last month's level of executions, Iran is the first country with the higher number of execution in the world, it seems. So I think that it is at least our duty to call upon the attention of all the international community, and especially not only the academia, but especially the academia, where cooperation, exchange of ideas, and the voice should be on the side of justice, international justice, at least. And I thank you very much for underlining that new law. I was totally ignorant about that. So it is a very big problem because it seems that a sort of a kind of answer to the escalation of the situation. So they answer with even hard instruments, legal instruments. But you know, one of the Italian most principal jurists in criminal law said in relation to the criminal law that a law can be legal but can also be illegitimate.
Yes. Unfortunately, I have an emergency which is happening right now, which I have to address. I'm afraid I'm going to have to step away. I apologize.
Oh, I'm so sorry for that.
No.
But thank you very much to be with us. Do you have 1 second to just give us a message to prisoners in Iran? A direct message. Just 1 second, please.
Yes. I would say that it is important to continue the focus and the awareness raising of this campaign, the new executions on Tuesday's campaign, because it is having effect. Sometimes you have cases like the most recent case that you referred to earlier, where the transfer is actually been delayed to another prison. And so I think we need to actually work even further to make sure that there is a better understanding of what is happening here, the scale of what is happening. And certainly the outside world needs to assist, support, and actually get involved more in what is happening in this campaign and other efforts to protect those who are actually extremely vulnerable, obviously, in a system that tries to deny any role for the outside world, but the outside world sometimes can have an impact.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. And please go. I hope it is nothing grave. And thank you to join us today. See you
Thank
soon.
you. I hope to see you again. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Before to leave, unfortunately, Professor de Varennes had an emergency issue. So I wish to thank you again, him, to join us today for this third episode. But before to conclude, let me to send a message to all the prisons participating in the movement of protest Tuesdays against executions. And I think that if we have just 2 minutes, I think that today in our third episode, since we didn't until now, I would like to try to list all the prisons participating in these Tuesdays against execution. I apologize for my bad pronunciation in advance, but this is the best way to reach all of you in each prison and to say again, we are with you and we are your voice, your amplificator in some way. So the prisons, the 48 prisons that are carry on the movement Tuesdays Against Execution are Kizil-Azar, Unit 3 and 4, Karajah Central Prison, Fardis Karajah Prison, Greater Tehran Prison, Korchak Prison, Kurin Varamin Prison, Chubindar Kazavin Prison, Ahar Prison, Arak Prison, Khorramabad Prison, Yasuj Prison, Asadabad Isfahan Prison, Dasgert Isfahan Prison, Shiban Ashbaz Prison, Sepidar Ashbaz Prison, both section, men and women, Nizam Shiraz Prison, Adilabad Shiraz Prison, both section, men and women, Firozabad Fars Prison, Sahedan Prison, Women's Ward, Borajan Prison, Ramohormoz Prison, Behbahan Prison, Bam Prison, Yazd Prison, Ghanouj Prison, Tabas Prison, Mashhad Prison, Gombade Kavuz Prison, Kwamshar Prison, Rashtad Prison, both sections, men and women, Rudzar Prison, Avik Teles Prison, Asbarum Lahija Prison, Dizel Abad Kermaja Prison, Ardabil Prison, Tabriz, Urmia, Salmash, Koish Prison, Nakadeh Prison, Miandoab Prison, Mahabad Prison, Bukham Prison, Sakhet Prison, Paneh Prison, Mariban Prison, Sanandaj Prison, and Kamijaran Prison. Again, I apologize for my worst pronunciation. I try to repeat the name, but repeat the name means that all of us are with you, always with you. So stay strong, and especially the message to all the families of prisoners in all those prisons I listed, just to give you the idea for people watching us and hearing us, how many people is risking their life now in Iran while we are talking. Thank you very much to be with us also today, and see you next Tuesday.